Nathan Smalley. Nathan is an infrastructure specialist too who works in the District 9 IT department, and for the last 2 years has been working alongside the DoIT security operations team. Nathan holds a bachelor's degree in network and communications management from DeVry University and is a certified CCNA in cyber operations. Thank you.
Good morning. Bonjour. Kalimera. No one speaks Greek?
Yeah, Kalimera.
Yeah, it's all Greek to me, so. Yeah, we went there for our honeymoon partially, and like I understood what that expression means now, because there is no alphabet I can make out of any of that. So good morning again. This is Driving the Secure Architecture. I'm glad that we got a nice big crowd to sign up for this, and glad to see everyone's faces, even though the lights kind of blur you out. So this morning, Brian Kelly in his talk, at the very end of it, he mentioned cybersecurity. And he asked the question, I'm going to ask it again. Is anyone scared about the cybersecurity for our vehicles? Show of hands. Concerned? Okay. Anyone not concerned at all? Okay, the CISO is the only guy that said not concerned at all. That's good. Take that as you will, good or bad, right? So we're going to be looking at a little of these things as we roll through them. And I want to start out, with Tesla hacking. Charles, and Josh, they showed us their Teslas, pretty cool stuff yesterday, and they showed some pros, they showed some cons, and all of that. And when we get to the cybersecurity side with the hacking side, there has definitely been some advancements in gaining access to these machines. First, they were able to trick the cameras by putting a sticker on the road, which caused it to veer. We had a little bit of demonstration of no lines and the car centering in the lane. There has been connecting to the infotainment part of the car, which is that center console. That's where the information is being displayed and where your entertainment is, so they smashed it together like Brad Jelena and called it infotainment. The third example I have up here is a remote hack. They were able to take a malicious Wi-Fi hotspot, connect the vehicle to it, and was able to remotely control the car, back it out, open doors, open the trunk while driving, and all of this. And then fourth, there's always that chance that someone will steal your credentials, download the free Tesla app, and then summon the car to them. Josh, does that scare you? A little. Because that is possible. I mean, we've all seen phishing attacks. If any of you went to Tyler Mann's talk yesterday, Gone Fishing, that is one way where you get an email, you click on it, you get a text message, you click on it, it can take your credentials. And then someone, they don't have to be near you, just, there's an app for that, download it. I got your car, man. I don't have to get near it. But this is not the point of the talk that I'm actually going to be dealing with. I wanted to bring this up because usually when we're talking about cybersecurity in cars, everyone focuses on the car. The car is not our problem here at ODOT. It's the infrastructure that it's dealing with. Whenever there's a flaw in a Tesla, in a Ford, in a BMW, in a Cadillac, that is up for the vendor themselves to patch those things. As it is, today, it is up to Microsoft to send out patches, right? And then we test the patches, and hopefully they don't break our network, and then we apply them in production later. It's the vendor to patch that. But it is our responsibility to then take care of the systems that they will be communicating through. You've heard terms such as roadside units. You've heard of signal phasing and timing, SPAT systems, our traffic lights. We have our DMS panels, all of these things. That is part of the infrastructure. And so, in looking at this, we're in a day and age where we are literally driving on an information highway. This is picture Wreck-It Ralph. I have young daughters, so usually anything I do in pictures is Disney related. Can anyone sympathize with me on this? Okay, good. I'm not alone. I'm not the odd man in the room. I also have two beautiful girls, and have recently found out that I am paying for a third wedding. So it's Disney princesses for the rest of my life, which is a good thing. But Wreck-It Ralph here, he's literally going on the information highway if you've seen Ralph Breaks the Internet. But even though this is a cartoon, it's kind of similar to what we're doing. Every day when we drive in, we are literally starting to drive on an information highway. We got routers and switches that we drive by every single day. We have cell modems, internet access. Brian Kelly mentioned edge computing, all that happening right there at the roadside. These are things that we drive past every single day. We see them in our traffic cabinets. All these systems are connected, so we have a LAN at every single junction. Now, normally when we think of these things, we have a building, right? And in that building, we've got our distribution lines. We have our horizontal lines, our vertical lines. We have our main distribution frames, our intermediate distribution frames, where all these things connect in. But there's concrete around them. But we don't have that out on the road. We just have these boxes, these cabinets that are out there, and they are just left out in the wild. So when it comes to security, I think most of us, when we think about this kind of stuff, is maybe we think about, whatever the most complex or sexy hack in the world is. I think we have a little bit of Hollywood in us. They get on a computer, they type really, really fast for about 10 seconds, and then they're in the NSA's server room, right? But there's far more to cybersecurity than just dealing with those kinds of threats. In fact, there are threats out there that are more common, probably more damaging, and easier to pull off than anything that you might see on television. And the primary thing we need to look at the beginning is securing these devices, these cabinets. And so one of the very first things that we deal with in security, if any of you have looked at or heard of the CISSP and all the material, they emphasize physical security first, because if things cannot be physically secured, you have nothing. And one of the first threats that we need to deal with is the reality of weather events. Lightning strikes, we have metal traffic cabinets. Metal's a pretty good conductor. It can take a cabinet out, which would then take away the availability of the network. Availability is something that we need to provide to our systems and is part of the three primary principles of security: confidentiality, integrity, availability. We need to make sure that systems are available so that they can be accessed, so that they can distribute information. And weather events can take those away from us. So we need to be able to understand our environment, what our weather's like. Ohio, you have all four seasons in 1 week. You never know what you're going to get. But these are things we need to look at. If a cabinet goes down, what's the plan to replace that? How are the other systems going to operate? What information are the cars going to be able to send? Ice storm, snow and ice. That's a big deal here in Ohio. We have 2 seasons: construction, snow and ice. Well, normally when it comes to equipment, what do we try to keep our rooms at for server rooms? 60 degrees. Keep the humidity kind of in there as well. We don't want it too dry because static electricity buildup fries the equipment. We don't want it to be too humid because then everything gets a little too wet and then electricity fries the equipment. We don't want our machines to get too hot, right? We don't want, for instance, we don't want the AC unit to break, take out the data center, and then no one has access to anything. Has that ever happened before? Not at ODOT, I know. HVACs don't break, machines keep working, server rooms never overheat. But when you have equipment that's in the outside, and you have temperature swings that we have here, negative 20 degrees, in the 90s, high humidity that are here. The inside of the equipment, it gets even hotter. These are things in security that you actually have to think about when you're putting equipment out into an environment. It's not the typical form where, we have everything in the basement, in the center with no windows, no one has access to it. These things are wide out in the open, available to the elements and available to the public. And so we need to make sure that when we go out there, that we're putting equipment that can handle the external environment so these systems remain available during all this time. The next thing we need to deal with, since these things are out in the elements, you got to deal with rodents. You know, when I first put this slide up, anyone seen Almost Heroes? Chris Farley? Are there too many millennials in this place? So Almost Heroes, Matthew Perry, Chris Farley, they're going out to West, they're going after Lois and Clark, trying to, get to Western Expanse, and then he starts talking about the animals and the bears and how dangerous they are. Then everyone freaks out and starts shooting at the animals like, it's just a squirrel, man. So they're all freaked out by this squirrel. So every single time I see squirrels, I think of Chris Farley. But squirrels cause problems. At Valley High School, my wife got out of school there because a squirrel decided to get in a transformer, shut the power down. They had to leave the building. There's no power. Squirrels like power lines. They like to shut power off things. If we don't have power, do we have a network? Yes or no? If you have power, do you have a network? Not necessarily. These are things we have to think about. Mice, I was talking to one of our traffic guys, and he was telling me about, some of the things that he saw, and he's like, I went in this one time, and I opened the cabinet, I saw like this black blob, which I assumed was a mouse that was chewing on the line because power got interrupted to the device, because the mouse ate right through it, incinerated the thing. If we don't have power, our machines won't work. If machines won't work, we don't get information. So we lose availability. These are things that we need to think of. This is more of a practical aspect to security, to cybersecurity, that we need to think about when we're building this infrastructure. We need to ensure that we're restricting access from unauthorized users. They're right out in the open. We don't need people just randomly walking up to these cabinets and being able to open them. We don't need them being able to jack into our equipment to gain access to our network. We don't need them changing the SPAT systems, to where they make the traffic lights go all green, all red. Who wishes they could do that? I know I do sometimes. I have more of a rural commute, so I don't have a lot of traffic lights, but sometimes when I'm going through Waverly, it's really nice, but I've got it to where if I'm driving 35 miles an hour and I catch the first light green, I'm green all the way and I don't get stuck. But we don't want people messing with these things, because if that happens, now we're going to be causing traffic problems, and John McAdam is going to be very, very angry that someone did that. So we don't want that done. We don't want people turning all reds simultaneously. We don't need people driving down, sensing with their phones or their devices all of our wireless networks and the cell modems that are out there, such as on our DMS panels and all that. And because we didn't change the default password, accessing those things, and then using our internet access with taxpayer money for free, that might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Something like that may not never happen to an organization. We don't want our resources used for anything other than what they were intended for. And so we don't want to give people access to our equipment illegally. So we need to make sure that all these things are secure. So what can we do about it? I mentioned a few of these things already. One of the things I don't have up there is when availability is taken down, we need to make sure that we have a business continuity plan, and within that, a disaster recovery plan. What is that? That is writing down on paper, if this event happens, what do we do to recover the site? We need to make sure that these sites are up quickly as possible, so that we can get the traveling public moving and keep them safe, that they have information when sites go down. We need to make sure that we do that. We need to make sure that in case of power failures, that we have redundant power supplies that are in there. And I think we have these in traffic cabinets, but I'm just giving you of what we need to have in place for it to keep these things up. If we lose power to a site, we need to make sure that it is able to stay up as long as possible until we can get there and restore streaming power to it. We need to make sure that we have correct and secure configurations in all devices. Don't use default passwords. Always make sure to have a strong, complex password that is not easily to guess. We tell you this also for your logins, right? For your personal accounts, you should do the same thing. Have nice, strong, complex passwords that are not easy to guess. That way people cannot easily access your applications, your profiles, your information. We need to ensure that we have proper access control. Someone opens a cabinet, we need to make sure that we know that cabinet is open because there's a trip in there. We need to make sure that, again, strong passwords on our console ports. We need to ensure that if someone unplugs a device to plug in a network cable, that we have port security on there. And port security, the basic idea of that is that we assign a sticky MAC address to that. And if you unplug that and it senses another MAC address from another device, it automatically shuts the port down. And that port can only be re-enabled based on administrative privileges. And then we need to be notified that someone tried to do that. We need to have monitoring all this that way we know what's going on. That way we have visibility in all these things. So that's looking at just the traditional physical side of it. Dealing more traditionally with risks from a hacking perspective would be the distributed denial of service attack. These attacks are very cheap. They are very easy to perform. And like Baskin-Robbins, there's 31 different flavors of them. There are many different ways that you can pull off a DDoS. In fact, there's 3 main types of these things. There are volume attacks, there are application attacks, and there are protocol attacks. And within those 3 types, there's many different ways to be able to do that. A denial of service is essentially, a distributed denial of service is if we have one node, and from that node, then I start a ping. Everyone's familiar with ping, right? And I tell that device to just keep continually send a ping to another device, and that device is going to respond. But if I then get 1,000 or 100,000 devices that are sending that ping to that one device, it's going to eat up the resources on that server to the point that it can no longer respond because it has congestion. It just shuts down. If that happens, John was giving his talk yesterday, and I was asking him about it because they're looking at real-time streaming data. So that means they're bringing in all that information. It's staying in RAM. They're looking right at it. If they are no longer able to get information, they have no idea what's happening on the ground any longer, and they're not able then to try to orchestrate or shape the traffic. That's a problem. And a DDoS would be very easily done, because we're in an IoT environment, an Internet of Things environment, to take out the resource utilization to where they have no more visibility to what's happening. Luckily, in talking to John, I'm like, so what happens if you have resource utilization? What happens if you no longer are able to get that data in? And he's like, well, everything just fails the defaults then. They're able to operate on their own. Speed limit, you got variable speed limit sites and all that. It'll go down to 60. If it's got the shoulder open in the smart lane, it'll automatically go to close, and everything just goes back to its default setting. That way traffic is able to continue as always. And we want to make sure that happens because our first priority in everything is the commonwealth of humanity. We want to make sure we keep people safe. The other thing that could possibly happen is, someone send out jamming signals which would impede devices being able to communicate across the airs. On wireless, we're going to have a lot of wireless technology that's implemented in that. We need to make sure that all channels of communication are staying open. So, how do we take care of that? Well, since a DDoS is extremely easy to pull off, it's also probably one of the hardest things to mitigate against. And so what do we need to do? First thing, we need to make sure we have a plan. Like we had for a disaster recovery plan for the environmental factors, we need to have one as well for DDoS. We need to know what it looks like. We need to know what our baselines are. If we don't know our baselines, we don't know what anomalous traffic looks like. And so when we start seeing traffic begin to uptick, that should throw alerts and red flags our way that something might be happening here. That way we know an attack is coming. We need to maintain a strong relationship with our upstream providers. When it comes to something like this, more than one organization is impacted when these events occur. I mean, between if anyone set up a kind of garage, or if you're on the network team, you kind of have an idea of this. Do you know how many different layers of organizations you need to get through to even get to ODOT? I mean, you got your ISP, you got ORNet, you got OIT, and you got us. I don't think I'm missing anyone there. So we need to make sure we have strong relationships with everyone that's down the pike to ensure when an attack like this happens, we're able to pick up on the phone and be like, hey, I see this happening. We need to get moving on this. So we need to have strong communication lines. A third thing that we could do is we could also leverage the cloud on this. Cloudflare, anyone ever heard of Cloudflare? They're one of the cloud providers. They actually have DDoS mitigation protection, and essentially what they do is they take the hit for you. They're able to send that traffic and absorb it. They state that their network is 15 times larger than the largest DDoS attack ever recorded back in February of 2018. Which I think had like 1.3, 1.5 terabytes of data that was streaming per second. So we could leverage cloud providers to help us absorb a hit like that. Another thing that we need to look at in protection is eavesdropping, impersonation, and privacy. You keep hearing that word privacy get dropped quite a bit. There's information about the public, about you and me, and we don't want people to use it. We don't want people to be able to use it against us. You know, everyone's real big on privacy these days, especially after Cambridge Analytica. Which, that one sort of confuses me to a little bit because it's Facebook. And if you know how the internet works, the reason why it's free is why? You sell your information to them, right? But we want to make sure that even though companies are using our information, that they're using it responsibly. And we want to make sure the same thing here. Like we don't want people to have just random access to our cabinets to be able to hop into our network, we also don't want them to be able to see all the data that is going. We don't want them to be able to sniff out the data. We don't want them to be able to hop on our network and act as a rogue node on there. We don't want them to be able to use it. And so, how do we fix this? What is the base of this? You know, Charles yesterday, and talking with our event streaming platform, mentioned the fact that you can take a VIN number and go to, I think it's vincheck.info, and you can see who the owner of that car is. We don't want that information to be visible. So there is a proof of concept that they're throwing out there that they're looking at using to help with these issues. And that is the Security Credential Management System. It's certificates. How many people are familiar with SSL? Okay. For those of you that didn't raise your hand, how many are familiar with the green lock on your web browsers? Okay, I got a few more hands. How many people are completely lost in what I'm talking about? Don't be ashamed. You're just in a crowd of IT people. No one will laugh at you. That green lock is based upon a chain of trust, which is based on certificates. If you would ever click on that lock, you would see a certificate has been issued to this website that is validating its identity. And basically it's saying that this certificate authority that we know of as a CA has stated, because you have identified with them, that you, other person visiting this website, can trust them because the root authority is trusted. And that helps with encryption, it helps in trust and giving your information. And so we have the same thing that's happened in here with this certificate credential management system. We want every vehicle and every node on the network to be able to have these. That way we can develop a relationship of trust that allows for communication. So when a car drives by and it's sending data out to another car, there's going to be a certificate that says, hi, you can trust me, and they can then establish a relationship of communication. We want the same thing with the infrastructure. And what this does is it ensures authenticity, It ensures integrity, that no one is tampering with the information. It is ensuring privacy, because no one else can get in on the conversation, because if you don't have the certificate, you're not a trusted entity. And so how this would work is that we would have people that then would go to the US DOT, they would sign up, that they could get a certificate issued from them, and then every node on the network and every vendor that puts a vehicle on the network would be able to get one of these certificates, and so everyone is able to communicate with one another. So that prevents people, because they're not registered, from just establishing roadside units, rogue ones like rogue access points. That way they can connect to our vehicles. And it also ensures the privacy of the matter. It's based simply on a public key infrastructure, which is what I just explained. Now the last one. How many have been watching Security Matters every month? All right. Just as I figured, I am not that popular. It's cool. I'm fine with it. I've been dealing with ransomware a decent amount lately. It's kind of a big thing in the news. The last few months, we have seen Georgia being hit. We have seen cities in Florida being hit. And the reason why these local municipalities are being hit is because they don't have the security resources. They are flushed with cash, and they are full of vulnerabilities. And so what is happening is attackers are saying, I'm tired of trying to, install the rootkits and all this kind of stuff. Why don't I just get in their network, hold their data for ransom, and just ask them for money? It's just easier if I ask you for money. Sounds kind of easy, right? It's kind of brainless. And so that's what they've been doing. And these attacks have been increasing. In fact, they've already doubled in this year in what was projected for. And so this is a reality that we need to look at, because it could easily happen to us. Now, typically these companies are targeted because they have a lot of vulnerabilities in them. But if we do our homework, we have proper strategies, and we're very intentional with our security, and it looks difficult getting into our network, I'm not going to say we're going to save ourselves from a ransomware attack, but what I am saying is it's going to be a lot less likely that we're going to have a ransomware incident. So how does this typically happen? Typically what happens, you get a phishing email, as we talked about in Tyler's talk yesterday. There is usually an Office 365 document that is associated with it that will then ask you when you open it to enable a macro. And once you do that, then the malware downloads, it encrypts your files, and you get this payment screen pop up before you. Now, this is kind of an issue, because we want to make sure that all of our servers that hold our data that we would be using for our business operations, data that the ITS network needs, is not affected by ransomware. Because once this happens, you don't have access to your systems any longer. Could you imagine not having any access to any data at all, and operations come at a standstill? Kevin, does that sound like a nightmare to you? We're going to say, yes, Kevin says that would be a nightmare, and we need to get things operational instantly. And we would. But what we see in most of these cases, it's taking sometimes agencies 3 weeks for recovery. And even when you don't pay the ransom, it's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars that could be spent just doing our daily operations, instead of trying to go back and clean up the mess that's gotten into our network. I believe it was in June in my Security Matter talk, I talked about the Colorado Department of Transportation. Back in the early of 2018, they had an incident of ransomware. Now, in that case, it wasn't a phishing incident, but 90% of all data breaches, events, they begin with phishing. But this one was because they went out and they put a node out in the cloud. They spun up a server, and I think it was within 20 minutes that server had already been compromised. Over 40,000 password guesses in a brute force attack. They got into the server. Since they got into the server, they were able to obtain administrator credentials. And then from there, they was then able to inject the ransomware into the network because that server was directly connected on their domain. I think it was 1/3, 2/3 of all systems were affected. And they were able to act quickly. It was the first time ever that a cyber incident ever qualified for emergency funds. So now we have emergency state funds that can be issued in the event of these things. This would be a very detrimental event to our network, to the ITS. So what do we do about it? Well, the first thing that we need to make sure that we have always is backups, right? Because the FBI states that we do not pay ransomware. We do not negotiate with terrorists. That's what I'm told. If you listen to the news, that's usually the line you hear. And that's not what we should do. We shouldn't pay them. So we need to make sure we have backups, and we need to make sure that our backups work. Nothing's worse when you hear a company says, we got backups, and then you find out, well, they don't work. Or the backups got encrypted as well. I've actually heard a case of that. We need to make sure that we're doing our proper research on what the current ransomware trends are, to make sure maybe we can get some hashes on some of this to be able to prevent it at the endpoint level. We need to make sure that our systems stayed patched and up to date. That way they can't execute vulnerabilities. We need to create a culture of security. What do I mean by that? When it comes to getting malware on your PC, and all of a sudden your network connection drops and you have someone for the help desk, come to you, you're like, you got malware, I need to re-image your PC. That's probably not the best feeling in the world. But we want to get everyone in the organization to a spot where they feel safe to even raise their hand and be like, hey, I had a phishing email, I clicked. We don't want to fire you. We don't want to punish you. We don't want to flog you. Who says flog? We want to make it to where it's safe for you to be able to raise your hand like, hey, I clicked, I have this on my system. And in case of ransomware, we need to make sure, if it would be that we can act very quickly, which is the next part, rapid incident response. We need to act quickly on these things. And that not only includes acting in the moment, but it also includes tabletop exercises that we as an organization, I think, need to engage in. We need to understand how to take care of these things. And in basketball, when I was playing sports, our coach would have us run the same drill over and over and over and over until we were almost vomiting in the trash cans. Pleasant experience back then. But he wanted to do it so that even in the throes of the game, when we would start getting tired and he would say, run the play, we knew exactly where to go, we knew our routes, we knew what to do. We need the same thing when it comes to incidents like these. We need to already have our playbook written down, memorized, and already practiced so we don't even have to think about it. That way we can minimize the threat of these events. Now, for a wrap-up. If you notice, I didn't talk a lot about certain technologies that we can use. Because as my middle point is saying here, technology alone is not equal to security. You can pay whatever you want for the biggest, latest, greatest firewall, intrusion prevention system, whatever the latest endpoint security system is, and all of that doesn't matter if the human factor isn't able to act, is weak, or is ignorant about what to do. The human factor of security is probably the most important part of security. And so I've hoped that I've emphasized that when we look at the future architectures that we're trying to create, in the ITS network with Drive Ohio and all that, we need to make sure that these are simple, sensible solutions and that we're just not hoping technology is going to save us. We need to make sure that we don't overlook the obvious. Many times if I'm trying to do something or figure things out, I automatically go to the most complex thing in the world, and it ends up being, well, the power wasn't on the monitor. Come on, we've all been there. You know, you call IT, be like, I need help, my computer's not working. And then they come, they look at everything, and then they just kind of wiggle the power cord and it comes back on. Usually it's the simple things that take care of things. And in security, we need to make sure that those simple things are not overlooked. And then we also need to build trust to effectively cover and move. What does that mean? Cover and move. This is a team from Jocko Willing's book, Extreme Ownership. He's a Navy SEAL. And he's basically talking about teamwork. If you're under fire and you need to get over to a certain spot, one man goes out there, he lays down fire on the enemy while the other can effectively move to a safer location, and then you help your other teammate get there. We need to help each other in this endeavor. When we're building secure architectures, we need to have open lines of communication. We need to feel comfortable with one another. We need to be able to work as a team. And so that's what I hope you take away from this presentation. Let's not overlook the obvious. Technology alone is not equal to security, and we need to have teamwork. With that, questions, comments, inquiries, and/or concerns? You.
How much do you think moving to DevOps does to improve the security of the overall infrastructure?
Okay, so you're asking what does DevOps need to do to increase security, right?
What is the impact of
Oh, the impact of it.
continuous integration, continuous delivery on security?
Well, we need to make sure that we're keeping all of our applications up to date. We need to make sure that we're bringing in secure code. We need, I think the last thing that we just dealt with, I think in my last Security Matters talk, is we've seen a 93% increase in risk aversion because of having the app developers using ZapScan and then having that second scan done by us. And so we need to make sure that we're constantly updating our application because new vulnerabilities are being found every single day. We're going more app-driven, right? I mean, you've heard, ITS network and, the OGO application. A lot of web servers get compromised very easily. And so we need to make sure that we're on top of that. Anyone else? Nothing? Okay. Thank you so much. It is 11:07. We are under 11:15. I did not hold you over for lunch. You all have a great day. Thank you.